Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting, July 25th, 2024. We're still gathering topics on the agenda. I don't know if anyone would like to talk first.
I kind of started this in the maintainers channel, but I'm gonna work on allowing release preview builds of the Terraform provider. Main reason for that is because people have got so many different configurations for how they kind of configure their Kubernetes cluster. For us to get into a situation whereby we have those configurations, kind of takes away or ends up spending a lot of time to just kind of cut a release that's going to be essentially one line of Go code and just cut a preview release to allow them to be able to preview it and validate it for us before we actually cut a real release. It's something that I've thought about for a while. I know, talk to Sunny, it sounds like the app, like the CLI and stuff has the ability to be able to do that. And I think we should kind of have the same in the provider. The end.
Okay, just typing. Was there an action there that you're looking for, or was just sort of sharing?
I think it's just an agreement that we're okay with doing that. It aligns with what we're doing on other Flux repos, and it will kind of speed up potential testing cycles as well by getting users to essentially validate things for us.
So are we talking about versioned preview builds or?
Yeah, so we'd essentially cut a 0.30 RC1 or something, and then we will finally cut a 1.31 at some point.
What's that? This could be just me, but I was wondering, is there anybody new today? I feel like I noticed some names that maybe are first timers. Anybody a first timer? Want to say hello?
Yeah, I can go. Hi, this is Deepak, and I mean, I'm not first timer, but I'm kind of on and off. Like I have been following Flux for last 3 to 4 years, and also like going to other projects as well, CNCF. So kind of that kind of, but I'm not very frequent. I just come here to kind of being curious about what is going on and how it can be part of my architecture strategy. So that's what it's all about.
Cool. Welcome.
Awesome. Do you want to share a little bit about your architecture and how you are thinking about Flux might help?
Yeah, I mean, I work for the Duke Energy, and I'm an architect over there. We have mainly the AWS platform, and right now we are using like the like a GitHub Actions and those kind of things. So I'm pretty big fan of the GitOps. So that's why the Flux also interests me along with other GitOps tools. So that's what I'm looking for to understand the roadmap and how we are moving, how we are making a progress, right? So that's what it's all about.
Like, what other tools are you using that are definitely like required and won't change?
Yeah, the Argo CD is the one of that where I have seen the organizations have started adopting it. So I believe these are the only two tools right now which are the main tools, like Flux and the Argo CD. So from the GitOps perspective, that's what I'm following right now.
Yeah, and I mean, people have used both, in different places or different parts of what they need. So there's definitely not a need to feel forced to choose one or the other. But I was also curious, like, what are your other tools that would potentially work with Flux, like using Jenkins, using Terraform, like.
Yeah, I mean, Terraform is kind of a standard. I mean, I have done a lot of consulting work throughout my career, and that's what like the Terraform people are using like crazy for everything. So, I mean, it's cloud agnostic and to kind of provision the resources and all, right? So, Jenkins, I'm seeing a little bit fading away. I mean, like people are mostly using like the most like they are using like the GitHub Actions. That's what the trend I'm seeing. GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps, people use it, but I believe it will go away down the line. Hackathon also, I was following it, I believe a couple of years back. I liked it. It's like a task-based and kind of like plug and play kind of Legos kind of thing. You can just bunch the tasks together, create one pipeline. I like that concept a lot. So that's where I'm right now. I'm just kind of looking into that, but these things in big organization takes time because they always look for maturity and all those things, right? So so that's why I just follow. I follow these things so that kind of in future, if there is an opportunity, we can get into these things.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Are you already in our Slack channel?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Because I'd say either the people here or obviously many more people on Slack, happy to share what their setup is and listen and share. So that's a great place.
Sounds good. I will upload myself. Thank you.
Cool. I see there's some other things being added. Anyone else? I don't know if we have any of the Microsoft people with updates.
Yeah, I do. I had to discuss. I I had to discuss the Azure Git OIDC related updates and questions, but I saw some folks have other topics as well. So, should I wait or?
We can discuss Azure first. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so the updates there from my side are that I've sent 3 PRs. One is in the Flux CD package repo, which has the implementations for the new packages, Auth, Azure, and Git for passwordless authentication. I'll just start pasting these over here. I did not have access to the Google Docs. Maybe I was just given up. I'm not sure, but I can put it over there when I get the access. But so that's the first PR. The second one, I think last time we had discussed that we need to have those integration tests for Git. So there is so I looked into the test infra repo and the integration test for OCI and kind of modified that to also add Git related functionality, which kind of consumes the new packages and validates the Git pull using that. So for that, there are like 2 PRs. One is in the test infra repo, which adds Azure DevOps related project and repository creation logic to the test infra repo, and the new integration tests in the, it's right now under OCI test integration, but I think we discussed last time that if things look good, then eventually we can probably move it out of there to like a upper level directory in a subsequent PR. So those are the open PRs for reviews. I did want to send the source controller one as well as draft to kind of look at things end to end. But I have some open questions there that I was hoping to discuss today.
We can discuss those.
Okay.
Last week, I think in another meeting, I think it was an early meeting, we discussed about where do we keep this test. And I proposed what you did, I think. I didn't check what you did, but I told you to keep it within the OCI package itself. Stefan agreed with it, so I think it should be fine. And later we can move it to somewhere else. And because that package has its own Go mod, it should not affect anything else. So it should be fine.
Yep.
Last week we also discussed about how do we implement this. I started reviewing your pull request today. Last week Stefan was saying maybe we need not have a separate auth package. It's just maybe, but we'll see, look into the implementation and decide what to do. He was not sure if we should, because after you authenticate, the token goes to the respective client, Git or OCI, and then there we'll invalidate them if there is a need to do that. So does this separate auth package help? So we're just casually discussing it, didn't have any conclusion, but we'll go to the pull request and see what can be done. So there is a chance that we may change the design.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Take a look and kind of please do share any feedback and be happy to kind of change things as needed there. I did have another, so I wanted to discuss primarily from like the source controller perspective. One was, I think, regarding the caching. So I've been trying to, and I see Sule is also here. Hi, Sule. So like I've kind of been trying to consume the cache logic in source controller to kind of get that going. So the way I was thinking of modeling is like just like in we have in the Helm cache today, like initialize it in the when we kind of set up the get repository reconciler and then pass it along to the new auth packages. I think you had brought up last time that the regarding the invalidation problem, right? So over there, I kind of wanted to discuss like. So like I think instead of adding to the cache when we retrieve the token, if we were to kind of add entries to the cache only after the authentication with Git was successful, so that way we would kind of only have successfully like validated entries in the cache. So we'll kind of add it later on in the source controller logic. So I just wanted to get like thoughts on that.
I have to, well, I'm a bit behind, but the implementation I'm working on at the moment is for the OCI package. So the way I'm seeing things is the OCI client will request the token from the OS, the provider, add it to the cache first, and then try to do the action it's supposed to do. Like for OCI, it would be mostly pulling. We'll try to pull the layers, and if there's an issue while pulling the layer, it will have a retry logic, and if the retry fails, we will be able to, I will add an option for that, and if the retry fails, then it will invalidate the cache and request a new one. And as well, you will have option for that, how many times do you retry, and at some point you will return an error to the upstream, like source controller here.
Yeah, but in that approach, we kind of the cache can have at some point entries that have not been kind of successfully validated, right? It can have errors, or maybe there is something wrong with the access token, the scope that was requested, but it's still in the cache.
Well, yes, but in practice, is it really the case? Because if you request a token from the provider, it's either it is successful because you have a token that is valid with a timestamp saying when it's either this, otherwise you get an error saying that you cannot have a new token. So if I put anything in the cache at that moment, it means I have a valid token. The way one cannot work anymore is if you retrieve a token from the cache, and between the time you retrieve from the cache and the time you try to use it, either someone has made a manual action to invalidate it, or it has expired, and then you have to do the eviction.
Okay, so you're saying whatever we are, I mean, the token obviously, token we've got is for that scope.
If you get a token, it means it's a valid token. You can safely put it in the cache, I think.
Okay, yeah. So I think modeling something similar for source controller is something that I'm kind of trying to, for the Git is something that I'm trying to kind of explore. Do you already, I know last couple of weeks ago, folks were saying that you're working on the similar changes for OCI.
Yeah, I am. I'm a bit behind, but yeah, what was next week, early next week, maybe you can talk about this. I'll show you what I have.
Okay, so I was thinking, is it all right if I kind of send out the source controller PR, leaving out the cache related
Yeah,
changes
you
so that we
can.
can kind of see things end to end over there and get feedback from folks, and then
think that's
let's
good.
translate the cache things.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
And regarding the auth package, coming back to what Sunny said, I wasn't there last week, but in previous discussion, we decided to have a separate, or we discussed this, having a separate auth package because we wanted to avoid duplicating many codes that is the same for OCI and the future Git implementation when it's come to providers.
Yep, I think that was the
That's
my
that's what
understanding as well, that we want to have the common code. But yeah, we can see how it evolves based on like feedback from folks.
I think there is enough common code to justify a separate package, but Stefan was just entertaining that idea. We don't need it. We'll see.
Okay.
This
Oh.
idea about adding to cache only after checking if it works, I think it's better. So currently in the OCI auth pack, OCI auth, right? The auth package, we set or we pass the cache to the login manager, but we can change it. Login manager can just return a token if it's asked to, but the higher level handlers, right? They will be handlers. So they can interact with the cache directly, and if they see that there's no key in the cache or they need a new token, then they can go to the login manager and get a new token.
Yeah, but that's not exactly the same thing, right? Because anyway,
you're moving it somewhere else.
Yeah, but anyway, you request a token, and the way you have it now, we request token, we use GSTK from Azure, GCP, or AWS. And if you get a token, it has to be a valid token for the scope that we have with the service account for the controller that is requesting the token, at least. If you get that token, it means we have a valid token with an expiration. Otherwise, we would get a failed attempt, right? With an error. Do you agree with that?
Have
I
to
think we have a
see.
valid token, but does that token work for authentication? That was the part that was kind of missing for me, at least. That is, I mean, the token that ARM has given is valid, but is it successful?
Yeah, the user could have somehow not
Maybe
given.
they've made an error in configuring the,
that makes sense.
somewhere because of it. So that's why the thing was that if we do it after we were successfully able to, then we cache it, at least those scenarios are taken care of. Then the interim scenarios come into picture where initially the token was valid, it was successfully able to pull, and then the end user changed something because of which the token needs to be invalidated. And that will happen after the expiry window anyways.
Yep. Yep. Well, now that you have said it, yeah, I think I agree with what you said.
Is this public in current login manager in OCI, that cache field?
You can see it, yeah.
If it's public, I don't think we have released it. We can still remove it. It is public. In provider options, it's a public field.
Yeah.
And I don't think we did any release after adding this. We can remove
we
it.
We did a release of the OCI, package OCI. I think, let me check.
I think you added this a few weeks ago, right?
1 second. Yes, we did on June 19.
When was this merged?
Well, anyway, even if it's the manager, but yeah, I think, yeah, from what you said, if you don't test the user with any IAM configuration, yeah, we can test first, make sure it has the scope before caching. I guess. But you still have to deal with the invalidation anyway at some point. So even if you retrieve it from the cache, you still have to validate every time whether you should evict it or not. Make sense?
Yeah, like, so we have cached after successfully validating that we are able to pull things for the first time. After that, if something changes and then the token it becomes invalid, then for such tokens, we still need to handle the invalid.
Yeah, because for the time, the expiration, the cache will deal with it. But if it hasn't expired, but it is invalid, you have to evict it yourself. So the client has to deal with that.
Okay, yep, sounds good. The other question that I had there, if we can move on to the next question, is that. Okay. So the other question that I had with respect to source controller was, I think in the RFC, we kind of failed to discuss the behavior if like in the Git repository, we have specified both the provider and the secret refs, especially for like Azure. I know for GitHub, the GitHub app and the GitLab one, I think we can provide both secret ref and provider. But suppose for the Azure one, the premise is that when we have the provider specified, the secret ref is optional, and if we have the secret ref, then provider is optional. But if there was a YAML which kind of had both the secret ref and the provider fields present, then to begin with, is it okay to have a simplistic approach where we either block that for Azure or prioritize either the secret ref or the provider one of that?
I think at the moment we have a priority. I forgot which one. But if you look in the Helm provider, in the Helm when we do this, I think it's first secret ref and then provider if both are set. But yeah, I think we should keep the actual behavior. One of those, if you have both, you shouldn't fail, but one of those should be prioritized.
Okay, and it's okay to kind of like, for example, if secret ref is being prioritized, then we just take secret ref into consideration and the provider part gets ignored for now, at least in the V1. Is that behavior acceptable?
You would have to check the actual behavior, but I would keep what we have at the moment.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Thank you. I will try to wrap this up, and I'll try to send out a PR without the cache to begin with, so that we can see those changes working from the source controller perspective as well. Thank you so much.
What do we do with the OCI auth package that this cache in the options provider is already released?
Yes. You want to change that? Yeah, well, it is released. In Flux package, what we do is we have a new tag, so we have a new version, right? When you release a new tag, we consider that a new release. So we did it with us. So we did it with package OCI. We have V038 that contains the cache credential. So we have this in place. And it's public, as you said.
Do we deprecate it?
If you want to make changes now, it's either we deprecate it or we have a new option. Anyway, the cache in the manager is optional, right? So if you want to have the cache on top of that, you can still do it and just not provide it to the manager. That will be duplicating it, I guess. So it's either we duplicate it.
Or maybe there would be a use case for OCI where you would want to cache it at the login manager level.
Well, for OCI,
Maybe we'll see.
I don't
Maybe
want
we'll find some use case for it.
Yes. Anyway, the client has to do the eviction. So the client will be instantiating the cache and giving it to the manager at the moment. And if there's non-validation, it has to deal with the invalidation itself because it knows when we have an error from the OCI port, the client knows how to deal with that error, not the manager.
The way the way things happen, I think it was supposed to happen because we didn't have a common client before. After implementing this cache, we decided to go for a common client approach. So initially, the way we designed it was to be consumed directly,
Yeah.
but now the client will consume the login manager. So
Yes.
I think it had to happen. I think it's okay, fine.
I mean, I think it's fairly new, so it's not an issue if you want to deprecate it. I mean, let's see when the client will be ready. Yeah, in my implementation and DPT implementation, and if you both think that we should duplicate it, we can go with for that.
Okay. Next
Like
topic.
my current implementation actually still had the cache in the auth package, but we can move it out completely also, I guess, because I was still thinking of consuming it only from source controller. So I could kind of actually remove the cache options all the way from that auth package. We all can take a look, maybe that will clarify. But if we're having the cache completely in the source controller, then
that is a third option. If you go with the auth package, but if you're not sure with that, we can just say that in the auth package, we don't put it in the manager, and the manager in OCI auth anywhere at some point we want to deprecate it. So that's a third solution.
Okay, we'll see.
Yeah, sounds good. Please let me know if you all have any feedback from the PR perspective as well.
Good.
I have some pending review comments which I have not submitted yet. One question I can just ask you, because I'm very curious. You have hard-coded some REST API, what's that called?
The scope, right? The Azure DevOps.
Oh, right. Where did that come from?
So yeah, I've been trying to find if there is a constant somewhere defined, but like if you check all of the Azure DevOps docs for any, and even the validation kind of end-to-end, that particular ID, the UUID is referred everywhere. So anytime you need to interact with the Azure DevOps REST API, then that's the scope you need to request, not the ARM scope. I can try to
I'm
find.
afraid if it gets updated on their end, server side, how do we know what value to use? So my
I can
comment was, where did this come from and when do we update this?
Yeah, I mean, I can reach out to the Azure DevOps team, but I have seen like at least from 2016, it's been the same from like many Azure DevOps REST API releases. It's not changed forever, and a lot of other code kind of takes dependency on this UUID. But I can reach out to the Azure DevOps team and kind of figure out that, you know, this is a ID that you can kind of rely on to remain unchanged, and what's the process if it does change.
Okay. What was the problem with the previous approach where we were dynamically fetching it?
Dynamically fetching what?
That API scope, we are getting it from the SDK. There was some service object, we are getting the value from the service object.
I'm
In
not
the previous implementation, we didn't have this hard-coded. What was the reason to change that? Was it not working?
I have never tried any other way of doing this. I
Okay.
think from
Okay.
yeah.
I was just comparing with the
Was
current
there is that
implementation.
previous implementation something that was checked in and kind of working that way, or
It was dynamically fetched from the SDK itself.
if you have a pointer to the code that you're referring to, I can take a look.
I can comment it on the pull request and we can discuss there. It's okay. Next topic. Matthias is here. We are
Hello.
adding. Oh, hi, Lee. Oh, sorry. I looked at Lee. You're here.
You have a nice painting over there.
Yeah, Pink Floyd.
So we are adding proxy support in OCI repository. Matthias created a pull request And after reviewing, we found out that the OCA verification part, which uses cosine and notation, should also support proxy. By default, it doesn't work directly. At least cosine key-based validation verification works. It uses the same transport, but keyless doesn't. It uses some upstream helpers that don't allow you to pass any client or any proxy configurations. So we have to work with upstream to provide a way to pass the transport that we created, which will take some time. And for notation, we in our notation package, we can just use our own HTTP client. It'll just work. So it's possible that we need.
So basically, like the wrapper that we have already, I sorry, I didn't check that code yet, but you're saying just that the wrapper that we already have, we can just send the client or the transport to that code, and the API that we use in this wrapper already accepts a client or a transport, right? Is that what you mean?
Right. In that upstream notation client, I think Sule contributed there. So it's a retry client, I think. We can just replace that retry client with another retry client that we host that uses our own transport.
I'm sorry,
Maybe you can if you open the OCA repository pull request, there's a comment thread. You'll find a discussion about how do we pass the proxy transport to notation client. And I think you implemented the retry HTTP client, right? For us, I think. There was a discussion a long time ago, and that doesn't accept a transport. So we can update the upstream client to accept the transport, but for now we can have a copy of the client in our repository itself.
Yep, okay.
So for now, maybe it may happen that we will release this feature OCA with proxy support, where for cosine we'll have partial implementation for proxy. For keyless cosine verification, we don't use proxy, but for key verification, we will. It may take some time to work with upstream to accept a transport for cosine keyless. So just wanted to share this and receive any feedback. What do we do? Anything else regarding OCA?
Still related to proxies, but not this PR particularly, but rather the other one about the STS endpoint, the one you found out that actually the way we are like the way I propose the PR right now is just for AWS, right? And for MinIO, it's something else entirely. So what focusing specifically on the AWS use case right now, I was like my tests, like because we already have support for proxy in Bucket, right? So since we are working, like we have this discussion about supporting the proxy for the image verification on the OCI repo API and everything, I thought that it would make sense to also support a proxy for, I mean, whatever remote calls we.
STS, right. That can
like
also go through proxy, right?
Yeah. And like, but in the case of STS for AWS or whatever other cloud providers, because the other cloud providers also have the STS endpoint, it's just that they don't have the same customization features around it like AWS does, right? Like there's sts.googleapis.com, there's sts.somethingmicrosoft.com. It's just that you can't like you don't have regional endpoints for those. You can't like create a VPC endpoint, an interface endpoint in your VPC for those in the other two clouds, but in AWS you can. But in any case, this is the kind of feature that like it's related to OIDC, right? Like you have to hit the endpoint from like when you hit like there's like the metadata server that serves the requests for like providing a temporary token based on the service account token that was issued by the OIDC issuer of the cluster and everything. They rely on the IP address of the client, right? So using a proxy for that will basically defeat this purpose. What I'm saying is that if you use because you grant the service account of source controller the permission to impersonate an IAM role, to assume an IAM role, right? And like if that pod, if the source controller pod hits the metadata server running on the VM or whatever, like whatever networking trick they do in AWS specifically, like the other side is going to rely on the IP address of the pod that made the call to identify the pod and look in okay, now I know what pod is, then I know what service account the pod uses, then I can look at the annotation that says which role should be impersonated, right? Should be assumed. So if a proxy does that, that's gonna fail, right? Like,
I think it's
so
dependent on the environment. Maybe in case of cloud, that may be true because it's workload entity.
yeah.
But I saw that in case of Minio, which supports some other
Yeah,
kinds
in
of
Minio, in the
SKS.
case of so in the case of Minio, I think it makes sense to support a proxy, but I even wrote tests for like my pull request has tests for like I basically mocked the STS endpoint of AWS in my tests, and so it's testable. But specifically for AWS, I'm not sure if it even makes sense to support a proxy for the STS endpoint, especially for the cloud providers. So in that case, I'm wondering if, and also now that I'm thinking, like how, because in OCI repository, we also support OIDC authentication, right? So somehow at some point that code that we have will do the same thing. Will hit like the STS endpoint in the VM and everything. And now I'm wondering if we use a proxy for that, like what's gonna happen? I think I should probably test that in an actual cloud environment of some sort. Because, right, that does that make sense?
But if it fails, people can just not use proxy when they're using the cloud environment.
So
We'll
basically
support
what,
proxy for the everything, but if it doesn't work for their environment, maybe they don't need to use proxy.
got it. Okay, so
But
if
if
it
you
makes
find
sense to
use
use for the
case,
generic provider in all the APIs, then it's still worth supporting it for that provider at least, right? For the generic provider.
but maybe later if we find out that we need to leave an exception for such things, we will make the change. Or maybe
I see.
let's do manual testing and find out. what happens.
There's no reason that a cloud provider couldn't also set up whatever the proxy is to have the proper workload identity to access what you're trying to access.
Yeah, good point. Like
So yeah,
the
like there's
proxy
always
could be
ways
configured
to
yeah.
there's always ways to build infrastructure that is going to break. But in the case of HTTP proxies, like that's a pretty important one to support for like an enterprise environment where they have like that's like their bridge to the network and their place for metrics gathering and stuff.
Got it. Yeah. No, I was actually just questioning if like, in the past, I think, for the bucket implementation, we even only allowed the code to flow, like the code path to be such that it would, like, we wouldn't even attempt to use the proxy for the cloud providers and only attempt to use for the generic provider. And in this case, in the last discussion we had with Stefan, he suggested that for the OCI repo API, we wouldn't put these guardrails, right? Like, we just allow proxy to be configured for any provider, and well, if it works for some cloud providers, okay. If it doesn't, then people will figure out and not use it, right? So the question is more like, do we put the guardrails or not? Like, do we just, like, we only support for generic and like document this and write the code in such a way that we will only even attempt to fetch the proxy configuration if the provider being used is the generic one or not? So that's the question, actually.
We should just add it. But in the previous discussion, maybe a month ago, I remember you brought this topic. Like, I think you told you would test what happens when you use proxy in GCP. And I think the conclusion was, Stefan said, why would you use proxy when you're in cloud? And you
Yeah.
did not decide to not support that, right?
Yeah. So like, and that was bucket, right? So yeah, I
Yeah,
I, I
Rocket, yeah.
wasn't able to use that with GCP. And I think after that we decided, okay, we're not gonna support GCP, and we're not even allow the code to try to use proxy for GCP. Like
Right.
like this, the very first suggestion you gave in the pull request, right? Like, I remember one of the pull, I think it was the one was giving adding support for TLS configuration for buckets, and then you suggested that we moved the part of the code that would retrieve the TLS configuration just inside the switch case of the generic provider, right? So same thing,
One-
right? I think we
one
decided the
question.
same thing for proxy.
One question. The implementation that you're working on, the pull request, isn't the use case, isn't it to migrate from Git repo to a CI repo? Is it? It
Sorry.
is, right? The use case is to migrate from Git repository, custom source, to OCI repository, custom source. That's why you want to implement the proxy.
No.
Yeah, like, I mean,
Is that
not
the relation?
exactly. Yeah, it's not the main goal, but like
The pull
Stefan,
request
when
is
Stefan,
is
yeah, like when
1536.
Stefan requested those features, was with kind of this mindset of, like, if somebody's using Git repo and they want to migrate to these other sources, then they have all the same configuration and everything. But I think that it's actually independent, right? Like Sunny's saying, like, it's not just for somebody to migrate from Git repo. It's just that we want to have support for these features for the other APIs as well.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Just coming back to the notation thing, that's true. I implemented the retry in OS, and we use the HTTP default transport. So it will look for the proxy on the default location if you want to use the proxy. Otherwise, yes, you can request a change there. But as it's used the HTTP default transport, you can use the default location with the environment variable. And it will look for that. It will look for the proxy there.
But in this change, we are adding per object proxy support. So it will not be an environment variable. It will be on the object.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, it's gonna take precedence over the environment variables. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you have to request a change there. Yeah, and it's not using the one I said, the one we set up in source controller, because in source controller Helm use OS v1, but notation use OS v2. So that's why I need to have the same, because those are actually two different modules. Make sense?
I think the version I looked looked up is the version we use in source controller. We use the old version of ORAS, that's what he's saying. The ORAS has a new version that we don't use at present.
No, we don't.
Oh,
in
the
source
other way.
controller- No, in source controller we use OSB.
We use
to-
both of the versions,
We
right?
use OS. Yeah, we use both of them. And so we use directly. We use OSB1 because we
Right.
set up a client, an OS client with V1 because that's what Helm support, and then we pass it to as an option to the when use the Helm SDK to pull our Helm charts. But notation uses V2 version, and it is notation
The new
uses
one.
V2, the new one. So we have dependency on the new one as well. But indirectly,
Okay.
we don't directly use it.
So I think this Minio topic, we did not start from the beginning. We just went to proxy part. So for Minio, some user asked for buckets, sorry, not Minio. Some user, I think last week we were discussing about what do we need to move bucket AKA to GA. And Stefan showed that some people are asking for adding STS support in Minio buckets. Oh, not Minio buckets, sorry, buckets, just Flux buckets. But the request they created, they mentioned Minio STS. In our code, we support AWS IAM-based STS. So if we just add a new field in our bucket object with STS endpoint, it will not work. It will not work for Minio. It will work for AWS STS, but it will not work for Minio STS. So it looks like the issue that the user created is more about Minio, but the implementation we have works with AWS
Sure.
STS.
Yeah, there's like one comment more focused on AWS in the thread, but I'm not sure like there's enough details in the thread to be super clear. I think I'm gonna just follow up and ask like a question like to be sure what is they're asking, but I'm not sure they are actually asking for this crazy STS feature of Min.io. Right? Let me look at this again.
But people may ask, right, in the future, if we
Yeah, they
don't
may.
make it generic, people may
Yeah,
say
yeah.
we are using Minio instead of S3,
Yeah.
and they have their own STS service.
Yep.
So Minio supports multiple different STS mechanism or for obtaining credential, and all of these different mechanisms have their own way to identify the client. Some are LDAP based, some are Azure Active Directory based, and they need different ways to identify the client. Some ask username, password, some take TLS certificate, some take something else. So these are, there are many arbitrary things that we may need to add support for.
But I just look at that
So
the issue
we'll
here
add-
and sorry, so like the author of the issue, they were asking this would enable usage of Min.io STS auth, which leads us to think that they're probably talking about the STS feature of Min.io, right? But the same person actually is the one who brought up the use case of AWS further below, and they didn't give any details of like this STS Min.io feature, like the details that you found out when you searched more. So maybe I'm thinking that maybe they actually want this for AWS for now. So just like to put the like just maybe think that maybe what they want right now is for AWS. And but yes, like we should probably still support this for Min.io as well. But I think I'm not sure this is exactly what they want right now. So maybe we shouldn't put a lot of weight on it. Maybe I don't know.
But if we go GA with this API with only focus on AWS, we cannot add further support in the future.
Yeah,
If we
yeah, you're right.
if we
You're
add
right.
STS endpoint at the root of the spec, now how do we add other fields that are also related to STS?
Yeah.
So
You're
I
right.
was proposing, let's create a subfield called STS, inside which we can have a STS endpoint or just endpoint, and then another field called provider, where it could be AWS or Minio, LDAP, or whatever they use, whatever user wants to use. And then another field called secret ref, in which you will provide your details about identifying the client, username and password for LDAP, or TLS certificate for some other way of authenticating. So we need some feedback from people who know more about it. This sounds good, or we should do it in some other way. Anything
Yeah,
else?
I was thinking about the API you propose here. Like, so we have spec.provider, and with this we also have spec.sts.provider, right?
STS provider.
So for
Or it's actually STS credential provider. And I'm not sure if it's obvious what this provider means.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just trying to understand. So like for Minio, like spec.provider would be generic, and spec.sts.provider would be the options that Minio supports that you found out, right?
Mhm.
So they would be so, and like, let's say if we like we're also going to support the STS endpoint for AWS, right? Like, so I think like for GCP and Azure, we can just like this doesn't exist, right? So we don't have to worry about those, but we should support AWS and Minio. And then how, like, what are we gonna put on in the provider field for AWS in this case, like spec.sts.provider, just AWS, just like the spec.provider.
I think we can add AWS, but you can also infer from the root level provider. If the root level provider is AWS, and the STS provider is empty, assume it's AWS.
Right. And if I want to be explicit, would that be just AWS?
Yeah.
And then for Minio, all the possible values that represent the different options, right? Cool.
I'm thinking. According to Minio's SDK, it should be, I think, so I saw multiple helpers for AWS. One was IAM based STS credential. And there was another one where you pass what's that called? Access token from AWS. This is key and secret key, right? You pass both of them. That is also supported in their SDK. So looking at that, I thought maybe AWS can also have variants. So you can identify yourself. If you are within the cloud, you don't need to provide anything. But if you're outside, you provide your access key and secret token to identify yourself, and then get the short-term STS token. So there's a possibility that we have to add support for both of these use cases.
Oh, I didn't know. So you're saying that we can still have static credentials that are only exchanged for temporary credential?
That's like you're identifying. So when you use OIDC, you are using an identity provider, which could be GitHub or something else. They help you identify who you are. It's like workload identity, right?
Yeah. In the case of Kubernetes, you're just using the service account
In-cluster-
token issue of the cluster. Yeah.
In-cluster identity provider, right?
Yeah.
But you can do the same from outside. Then you would use the access key and secret token to identify who you are and then obtain an STS token. So
But
maybe
if you were running on GitHub Actions, for example, just having the GitHub token would be enough, right? You wouldn't need Like just the temporary OIDC token would be enough, and not you wouldn't need static credentials, right?
So you have to register GitHub OIDC as your identity provider. in
Yeah, but that's
AWS,
like a
in your
configuration on the cloud provider, right? Like
Right.
you like in GCP, it's like you create a workload identity pool and a workload identity provider, for example. That doesn't involve any static credentials, right? Except like the public keys. But in this case, like in the GitHub case, it's just the well-known URL of the issuer of GitHub Actions, and then they hit that endpoint to get the endpoint of the public key, the JWKS keys, right? In the case of if it was a cluster, you would upload those keys. For example, in GCP, you can upload the JWKS set
In
of
case of
public keys.
In case of EKS, you create the cluster, AWS will automatically register an identity provider.
You get the URL of the cluster issuer and create a provider with that URL, right?
Right. So my conclusion was maybe just AWS is not enough for STS provider. You should have subcategories, STS with, I don't know what to call it. Menu has some name, I guess. Some static credential or something. I don't know. AWS static or something. We can discuss and figure out what to name it. So it's like
I didn't
it's getting too
understand
much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just was saying it unlocked a lot of things that we are not expecting. Without thinking it would be really simple.
Yeah. But I was trying to understand the thing you said about in which situation we use static credentials to exchange for temporary credentials. When does that happen?
You can do it through AWS CLI itself. So you don't keep a long-term credential which has a lot of privilege. You just authenticate that user with your credential and then you obtain a STS token which has all the high privilege, which will expire after an hour. So what you have in your local computer doesn't have any privilege. It just helps you log in, identify yourself, and then you obtain another token which has full power. I think that's the recommended way to use credentials.
I see.
So if anybody steals your computer, they just get whole token, which doesn't have any power or any privileges.
But if somebody gets my computer, they would get my static credentials, and they could run a command that would get them the powerful
That's
tokens.
something I don't understand. What's the point? You're just adding a second layer of abstraction.
Yeah. Like it's just
confused with
one
that.
more step, but you still, right? Yeah. So that's weird.
But maybe it's easier to block it, maybe.
If your password is compromised, you change your password and people can no longer authenticate as you. But if your password confers some authority and the authority service has a cache that still has your old password in it, then that's a problem. And you wouldn't have your password cached in a service like that anyway. But it's layered. The approach is so you obtain a credential, and then that credential confers the authority, not the password. So those services are decoupled, and if your password is rotated, you can't get that token anymore, right? You still have to change your password if your computer is compromised. But you don't have to go back and expire a bunch of tokens because they've already expired by the time.
I see. So those tokens can be revoked like before their expiration.
I don't know about that. I mean, on certain cases maybe, but they expire on a faster frequency. Your password wouldn't be expired. You'd still be able to use it unless you changed it yourself.
Makes sense. Cool. I also saw that you made some comments in the RFC for
Right. It's
Uh,
mostly around clarifying some of the paragraphs. Like some
yeah, I
places
saw
we
that also
mentioned.
unresolved the thread about I swear that I fixed that. Like I maybe just I don't know what happened. Like, but yeah, I yeah, I'll fix that. I thought I fixed it, but yeah, apparently I didn't. Sorry. Thanks for catching that.
I was asking for maybe. So in some places you mentioned that requests or events going from the controller to notification controller will be sent with something, but nowhere in the RFC we discuss about those details that notification provider's server expects some prefixed metadata. So I tried to mention that the summary or the proposal talks about solving this problem for a user, but there you suddenly there is a line which talks about this details about of how the notification control server expect things to be. To make
Right,
it
you mean I
simpler, we can
didn't
just
you mean I didn't give much detail of about the internals of notification controller, right?
I think it's okay not to give it, but there's a mix of perspective. One is from a user's perspective, other is from a developer's perspective. A user will never know that how those two controllers communicate. So it would be simpler if we just write from a user's perspective. They just add an annotation. That's it. And in the implementation detail or design details, we talk about how a controller will send the event this prefix metadata to notification controller, and then it will use it to do whatever it needs to propagate things.
But the point is, like, you would like to see some detail about the implementation from
Not
the perspective of the
necessarily.
developer.
You can add it. My point was there's a mix of perspectives in the summary and proposal. Can
Okay.
be from a user's perspective. They will not know about how things are happening. They will just edit the annotation key. That's it. Implementation detail is upon the developers. So they will check the design details and they'll know how, what's happening in the background.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
We can ask questions. It's okay.
Cool. Okay, so but it looks like from the three PRs I have open right now, there's this one of the RFC. Like there's not I mean I'll just address the comments. There's not I think nothing much complicated to discuss about it. And the other one about OCI proxy is also not too much, right? It's just adding the transport to notation and fixing the test and everything. The only one that is a bit may require more discussion is the one we were discussing about the STS, right? So I guess well, I'll review again the comments, and I guess that one we could still like probably benefit from another discussion next week, right? When Stefan is back, I guess, right?
Mhm.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Any other topic? We have some other topics, but time over left. Kingdom, do you know about the last topic? You're muted.
Yeah, I can give this update at least. So if you're interested in going to KubeCon in Utah, in Salt Lake City, there is a scholarship available for travel funding, and the application is due September 1st. we've submitted a couple of things. I wasn't involved, but Tamo and Lee submitted a couple of things for lightning talk proposal and a maintainer talk. So we'll see what that comes back. Usually we get those slots. And I will talk with Tamo about how do we get, I'm not really sure how do we get new maintainers on the maintainers list, but Matthias, this may be something you want to investigate as well. I don't know if you're on the CNCF Flux maintainers list yet or not, but there's some process required to get on that list, and it's
Yeah, I
manual.
think I'm not.
Okay, so I'll let you know when we find out what it is you have to do.
Cool,
to get
thanks.
on that list.
So it's the mailing list.
Yeah. Yeah, where all of the notifications about things like travel funding and scholarships and maintainer talk slots are delivered. So
Nice.
we should.
I heard there is some automation in the background which checks the maintenance lists in our community websites and does something.
I don't think it's completely end to end. The first thing you need to be sure you do is make sure you are in the, there's a community list that has all of the, I think it's in the community repo, all of the maintainers stitched together from all the maintainers files across all the different repos. It looks like Matthias is in there as a community maintainer, actually. So that's a different list. Project/Flux project maintainers. That is the list. So yeah, so you should be in there. That list only updates once a month. So there's a action I can run to make sure that it updates now. And then we'll send the list off to I guess the CNCF service desk and ask them what to do.
Thank you.
That is the last thing on the agenda today. Any last minute topics?
I still want to discuss about the proxy if we have time. Or we can stop the recording and continue discussing.
Okay, let's
What
do
you-
that. All right. Bye, everyone.